Welcome to the Forged by Trust podcast. I'm your host, Robin Dreeke, former U.S. Marine, spy recruiter, best-selling author, and trust expert. Don't forget to check out my free Keys to Communication course. Each of us craves psychological comfort, healthy relationships, and being valued by others. But most of us struggle with the communication skills we need to achieve our goals. Therefore, I created this 40-minute free course to provide you the 4 pillars to great communication you need to start your journey to forging trust for every aspect of your life, both personal and professional. Check out the link in the show notes or go to my website, www.peopleformula.com, and enroll. Coming up next on the Forged by Trust podcast.
Social engineering is the ability of one person to influence another, using a variety of different means, everything from trust building, rapport building, and influence, to manipulation tactics such as coercion, blackmail, and threats. A lot of the attacks were now being leveled against humans because humans were a lot easier to exploit than these really, business class enterprise networks. The most important thing that I learned about myself is that all of these traits that I had classified as bad, I could now use in a way that was very good.
Welcome to the show. I'm Robin Dreeke, and on the Forged by Trust podcast, we decode the interpersonal communication skills of the world's most acclaimed forgers of trust. We unlock the skills and techniques from spies, spy recruiters, master interrogators, globally recognized behavioral experts, C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, acclaimed authors, and thought leaders. Each episode provides specific actions that you can immediately apply to any aspect of your personal or professional life.
Today's episode, The Social Engineer, is with my friend, a world-renowned social engineer and security expert, Alethe Denis. Alethe Denis is a senior security consultant at Bishop Fox, an offensive cybersecurity company. She co-founded both an IT MSP and VoIP phone service company while working in global market and competitive intelligence. She made the leap into cybersecurity after revisiting her childhood love of hacking through the DEFCON Social Engineering Capture the Flag competition, which she won and received the top honor of a DEFCON Black Badge, free entry to the conference for life, in 2019. Alethe is now an industry-leading social engineer expert and cybersecurity ally for companies around the globe. During today's episode, we talk about what social engineering is, being groomed by a predator, using social engineering for good, 3 keys to forging trust, and so much more about her intriguing, amazing journey.
Alethe.
Hey, how are you?
I am good. Hey, thank you so much for taking time. I just figured the easiest title in the world, The Social Engineer.
I appreciate that. There are some folks that may contest that, but yeah.
And I'm not talking to them today, am I? So how you been?
Been doing well. How about yourself?
Good.
So I had like the craziest opportunity come out of that Darknet Diaries podcast episode that I did last year. And I had somebody from the Special Operations Command of the Army reach out to me. And they did so on like a dormant Instagram account that belonged to their wife. And so the message was like not just filtered, but like put in the spam folder on Instagram. And I look at everything just because my curiosity always gets the best of me. And it was like, please, this is not a scam, I promise. This is where I work and this is what we'd like to do. And I was like, okay, well, if you're legitimate, send me an email to my company email from your company email, and then sure, let's talk. And what it ended up turning into was an opportunity for me to go to Fort Bragg and train a whole bunch of special operations folks on social engineering. And I'm like, I can't tell anyone. But
can I include that though, that you got called to do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
But it was like one of the most incredible opportunities, and just the folks that I got to meet. I don't know if it's mirrored for you. It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But the folks that I got to meet were just incredible people,
awesome.
Most of which were active military and then had transitioned into a civilian role with military contractor. it's never the highest paying gig when you're doing stuff for the government,
Right.
but it was absolutely one of the most rewarding things that I've done to date, and just completely and utterly humbling that they would want to listen to what I have to say.
And why was it the most rewarding to date?
Just because I think of the reach and the potential that what I was sharing with them, the potential impact that it had. Because ultimately, what they were tasked with doing is protecting identities within the military. And so what I was sharing was going to enable them to train and teach and test their military personnel when it comes to social engineering and not oversharing, and how the information that they share can be leveraged to find them while they're deployed, to find their families, to know just too much information about them and be able to phish them and, gain all kinds of other information from things like canary tokens and stuff like that. So it's helping individuals learn how to protect folks who would be completely vulnerable to attack if that information became weaponized against them. So just cautioning them about social media sharing and, what types of information are okay to share, not okay to share. Just taking their personal cell phones with them can be enough to compromise an entire operation. So having the ability to kind of shine a light on that and make it something that seems more valid, because it's not just their, command or these military contractors that are telling them this is bad. But I think having an outside influence to kind of validate that fear and that worry on the part of their superiors and on the folks that are really tasked with trying to keep them safe goes a long way. So it was a lot of fun. It was also neat to see that something that I kind of take for granted as far as, the ability to develop pretext, for example, was so completely foreign to a lot of these individuals. Like how these things are developed and how the information is sourced was something that really blew a lot of minds. So it was.
And I'm just going to have to stop you because you're going exactly where I want to go. So, because helping the military, helping the government protect themselves and protect identities is not a state secret. So let's just start at the beginning, because you're going down such great rabbit holes. I think the audience will get a lot out of, because you are the perfect storm of interpersonal relationships and forging trust. And what I mean by that is, so first I'd love to hear about what your definition of social engineer is. So Alethe, with that, thanks again. Welcome to the show. What is social engineering?
So social engineering, in my opinion, kind of gets a bad rap. Most people think of a social engineer as someone, and this is a common definition, someone who cons, scams, or tricks an individual into doing something that is absolutely not in their, or perhaps their company or family's best interests as well.
Or nation also, as you've
Or
been.
nation,
Right.
yes. So it's typically thought of as scammy, underhanded trickery that is conducted on the part of a malicious individual. In my opinion, social engineering can be so much more than that, and something that I've really taken to heart when I conduct social engineering engagements, which are essentially when a company hires me to test their humans against a threat through means of what we commonly think of as not hacking, but phone calls, emails, text messages, all of those things can now be potentially a social engineering attack. So to put it briefly, social engineering, in my opinion, is the ability of an individual to influence another individual, whether that is on a positive or a negative, can kind of be left up to their discretion. But I would say, I'm trying to put it as eloquently as possible and I'm failing. But in my opinion, social engineering is the ability of one person to influence another using a variety of different means, everything from trust building, rapport building, and influence to manipulation tactics such as coercion, blackmail, and threats.
That's fantastic to understand. And basically,
if you're looking for an example of it, think of those crazy emails you sometimes get from the Algerian prince that says that he's got $1 million in a savings account just for you if all you do is send him your bank information. As was going on many years ago, but even more sophisticated these days, where they're pretending and even using the same phone numbers, saying that they're your relatives, put in jail overseas. They need you to wire money right away. I mean, they're so sophisticated in what they do. And those are all different examples of the malicious social engineering that is out there, basically forging trust in a malicious way to inspire you to take action that might not be in your best interest, no doubt. Alethe, how did you go down this path? How did this all happen in your life that you became this amazing social engineer? For good, I should say.
For good, yes. So it didn't always start off with others' best interests in mind. I talked about it quite a bit in other podcasts, so I won't go so deeply into the details here, but I started off as essentially a bad kid. I was a latchkey kid.
You know me, you've listened to my show,
I know.
You know where I'm going.
I know.
Bad kid, Alethe. What is a bad kid to Alethe?
Yeah. So it is a bad soldier. When we think of a good soldier as someone who takes direction, who follows instructions, and who cooperates for the greater good with the rules that are given to them and the expectations of behavior. I was a latchkey kid. I was mostly unsupervised. And while I stuck to the rules when it came to the important things, I was always trying to push boundaries, trying to make things do what they weren't supposed to do, and then perhaps, fell into the wrong crowd and started doing things that were technically illegal.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in a variety of different locations in South Africa and California. I kind of split time between the two. I spent my younger years, I was born and raised in South Africa. I moved to Southern California and then Northern California in my preteen years. And then I spent my teenage years back in South Africa.
So
and graduated high school.
So how'd that,
over there.
I mean, what's your family do that allowed that to manifest like that? That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, my parents were missionaries, and so they decided to move to South Africa back in the time of apartheid, which was pretty crazy and scary for a couple of American kids who just got married to want to take that on. So they moved to South Africa, started a family, had myself and my siblings. And then when they separated, my mother came back to the United States and my father stayed in South Africa. And so I split time between the two and kind of bounced back and forth between households. And my mother was like the really cool big sister that just kind of let me freely explore and be creative and get into trouble. And then my father was much more strict and had a much more regimented style of parenting.
So with your mom, do you remember your first adventure that you kind of took on your own that was a little maybe scary or out of the norm that you're like, in hindsight, that was kind of interesting that I did that?
So there were quite a few situations that now I look back, and I have a child around the same age and I'm like, how on earth? But when I was around the age of 11, I had my own account at the video store, like videotape rental store. Right. I was 5'8" when I was 11. And so most people didn't really question that I was probably at least a teenager at that time. I grew up really around a lot of adults, so I could conduct myself in a manner that gave off that air of being older than what I was. And I would just kind of ride the bus around town and do whatever I wanted after school or on the weekends. So I spent a lot of time just hanging out in downtown Santa Cruz and kind of getting into trouble. I had a few friends that taught me how to shoplift, and we would sneak into movie theaters. One of us would go to the front, ask to use the payphone inside, because of course we needed to get in touch with our parents. And back then there were no cell phones. So then one of us would get inside and then open a side door and let the rest of us in. And it's kind of funny looking back now, because we were the only people sometimes in the theater, and they had to know they didn't sell any tickets to that movie or that showing. Right. And they just kind of let us stay. I guess they kind of admired the nerve of these kids, and they just kind of let us do whatever we wanted until the shoplifting got a little bit out of hand. And then we started to notice that we'd get a tail every time we walked into a store.
Oh my gosh. What were you taking?
So, candy, mostly ear piercing kits, makeup, silly things.
Right.
But, it was being 11 or 12 and being mostly unsupervised, we kind of got into a healthy amount of trouble. As far as adventures, we lived on a college campus. And so we had free range, like to roam this entire college campus.
Sorry, what'd your mom do? She's a professor?
She went back to school. And so she was working on finishing her degree. And so we lived in family student housing at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And so we just rode around this campus on the bus all day and explored the different colleges. And it was next to pretty dense, Northern California mountain forest. And so we would go off adventuring in this forest. And back then it was kind of like you just got kicked out of the house in the morning on a Saturday and just told not to come back until dinner. And so we would go explore in this forest. And it was like Lord of the Flies, because you'd had this whole pack of kids out there exploring in the forest, making their own little encampments and setting up their own little tribes and, setting your own little government, your rules and all that kind of stuff up. And I would have my siblings and like the neighborhood kids, and we would get into like disagreements with each other and get into little mini wars over certain resources and things. And it was just funny that, like, looking back, it carved out all of these like relationships with people and built these really strong friendships and networks. And these are people that I'm still in touch with to this day. And when I see them, it feels like, just yesterday that we saw each other last. And so we would go running around in this forest, and there were like mountain lions and all kinds of stuff we would see, and just kind of had to like pray that we didn't get attacked and like try to be smart about it. But we'd also run into nudists and all kinds of other things in the forest and have to cope with that as, preteen children out roaming in a forest by themselves.
My gosh, what a great example of curiosity, problem solving, human interaction and communication. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And once again, I see this amazing theme of the most inspirational, successful people in life are curious, they solve problems, and they get out of doors. It's remarkable. So everyone else that you were with, that you grew up with, that you said you're so close with, what'd they wind up doing?
So some of them went into social work, and others became psychology focused, and some are still in college, going back to school for degrees, more advanced degrees in psychology. Others became nannies, professional caregivers, and others went into technology. For example, both my brothers went into technology as well. We would break everything. So we would go dumpster diving as kids and just pull things out of the dumpster, like clock radios, old TVs, like the cathode ray tube TVs. I had an old black and white TV in my room with like bunny ears. And we would like dismantle these electronics and see, what's inside. How does this work? And so it just became this like fascination for all of us, just, finding things, seeing if we could repurpose it. And if we couldn't, we would tear it apart and figure out what made it tick and see if we could put it back together. We were not always successful in the last step there, but I would say a lot of the individuals that I was close to went into either some kind of role that contributed back to society in a meaningful, positive way, or went into technology and information technology specifically. I kind of had a roundabout path to get into this information technology and security space myself. Bouncing a bit back and forth between different school systems was a little tough. And the September to June school schedule is a lot different than the round, like full year January to December. So anytime I switched schools or countries and schools, I would have to start in the middle of a school year and kind of catch up the first half of the school year. And it absolutely meant that I did third grade like 3 times. And it was a little frustrating for me because I was the oldest kid in my grade when I was here in the United States. And then when I went back to South Africa in junior high, 8th grade, I was, 6 months behind everyone else and missing a lot of the language skills that they had because Afrikaans was a mandatory requirement as a second language. And I missed everything from, the age of 9 until 13. And so I had this giant gap to overcome. And I just started kind of faking it till I made it was my strategy.
Right.
And once I got done with high school, I knew that the things that I loved the most from school were biology and computer science. And I was in I was actually the first year to participate in a computer science program that focused on programming skills and learning, logic and loops and how to code those things rather than just typing, because I went to an all-girls Catholic school. So prior to that, the computers were used strictly for typing.
Right.
And we were really encouraged to do things like home economics and art. So I did computer science, biology, science, math, and I wasn't very good at math. So I knew that I had to find something that wasn't super focused on mathematics and chemistry, but that I could use those, biology and computer science skills that I loved so much doing. And so I went to college for chemical and molecular sciences with a minor in computer science. I didn't finish that degree, and I'm pretty open about this, but I exploded my entire personal life. And I ended up going from South Africa very quite abruptly back to the United States in 2001. And it was just a few months before 9/11. And I arrived here in the United States with 2 suitcases full of clothes and all of my personal knickknacks and $200. And that's all I had. And I crashed with my mom just long enough that I could buy a 1985 Honda Accord that was maroon from bumper to bumper. Like everything besides the black bumpers was maroon on that car, interior and exterior. And I bought it for like $1,500, and I was working minimum wage at a pet store. And it was sincerely the most humbling experience of my life to be flat broke, making $6.25 an hour, and being told that I couldn't transfer any of my high school or college credits without going and retaking or taking for the first time, in my case, the SAT, and then trying to apply for colleges and still knowing that I needed to somehow make a living.
I won't go there unless you want to. So your life explodes. Did you see yourself as a victim, or did you have a plan? I mean, what were you feeling at that moment? Were you trying to solve the problem?
It was tough.
Or were you kind of rolling with the problem?
It was tough because I was misdiagnosed with depression and anxiety. And no one ever considered that a pretty capable, functioning young woman would have ADHD. And so people were trying to put me on Prozac and all kinds of other stuff. And I was feeling really pushed out of my family unit as kind of the black sheep. And so I turned to friends online. And I was really involved in MIRC chat rooms and
What chat?
Merc, MIRC. It's an internet relay chat back before social media. This will date the crud out of me, but back before social media, people used to communicate with each other in purely text-based messaging rooms.
That's what Jordan Harbinger was talking about on his episode, where he was chatting with people all over the world in Israel and everything,
Yes.
talking to Russians.
Right.
And he said, why would I go to high school to learn about Nimbus clouds for the 50th time when I'm talking to these fascinating people all over the world? So Alethe was doing the same thing.
Absolutely. I was, my name is
people.
my name is Alethe, which is not common, and it's Greek in origin. And what I thought for the longest time was that my name meant truth. That's what I was always told. And I met some folks from Greece through Merc, IRC chat, and they told me, actually, no, like the direct translation of my name means is fact, not just truth, but is fact, like the concrete fact. And I thought that was so incredible that I was able to get that kind of information. Like, that's not something I could go get from a library. The internet was still relatively new, and it wasn't just this endless thing that you could search for any piece of information you could ever want. And so having somebody who's local, who understood the language, be able to give me that, as well as like the recipe for the most insane, grape leaves that, wrapped in like those are so good. Dolmas are my favorite food ever. I'm just giving you all the answers to all my security questions. So what happened is I kind of like fell into this world, and it was as a teenager, that was my escape from the normal life. Back then, you couldn't just like dive into a movie in your bedroom because there's like one TV in the house and you probably didn't have the remote. And so I ended up sneaking computer time at school, and I would sneak computer time whenever I could at home. And at that point, it like, dials up with the phone. So if people need to use the phone, you got to get it offline. But I was staying up until like 2:00 in the morning talking to people online. And I met someone who claimed to be a man from one of the eastern side of the continent, United States. And he said that his name was Craig and gave me a handle. And I didn't know much beyond that about him. And he ended up influencing me to believe that he was essentially my only friend. And I say he with like quotes because I don't even know. But this person ended up essentially grooming me as a target for being a predator. And I'm sure that I wasn't the only teenage girl that was in that situation. And I'm absolutely not the last one that ever was. And now with social media, I'm sure that it's infinitely larger of a problem. But at the time, it was relatively new in concept.
Right.
And so when it came to light that this person knew who I was, about me, was shipping packages to my home from overseas. So they were shipping things from the United States to South Africa. And my parents found out, they lost their minds. And this is my father and my stepmother, and rightfully so. I mean, they were utterly horrified. And at the time, I was so attached to these friendships that I made that I couldn't see their perspective.
Sure.
And so I, became even more walled off and more depressed and just unhappy, and kind of like dug my heels in and continued to behave inappropriately to the circumstances. And so I was blamed for this. It wasn't seen as something that was, I was a victim of. And so I accepted that blame, and I was very, very hard on myself, and, thought that I didn't deserve to be in this home and this society with these people, and all of these things kind of like came crashing down around me. And that feeling of just being completely rejected by your family, something that is tough to explain to anyone who hasn't been through it. But it was like all of the classic things that people think of when they realize that they've become a victim of what amounts to a sexual predator, right, essentially is what happens. Even though it was online and it wasn't physically in person, those types of feelings still become something that you have to live with and struggle with. And if you don't have that support system to help you understand that you're a victim, it just tends to manifest as like part of your personality now. You're a bad kid, you do bad things, that's just who you are. And so, well, when I landed in the US, I started smoking, started getting tattoos, hanging out with all the bad kids, doing drugs, and it was just like, I just doubled down on that persona and was like, this is who I am, I guess. And so I went through a series of really terrible relationships because in high school, I wasn't really permitted to date at all. And so instead of getting to do a lot of that, early relationship failing, the stuff you're supposed to do when you're younger, I ended up doing a lot of that in my 20s. And it was pretty crazy. But at the same time, like looking back, that's where I really developed a lot of the skills that I have today, as far as recognizing microfacial expressions, being able to baseline someone and then recognize when their behavior's changed, or the way that they're carrying themselves, the way that they're expressing things has changed in some way, and figure out what that means. A lot of those skills came from those bad relationships, and honestly being just lied to, taken advantage of, and manipulated over and over and over again, and started to see those patterns develop in other relationships to the point where I could be like, oh, this one's not good, almost immediately.
Yeah. How'd you turn the corner?
So about 15 years ago, I was 25 and I was getting divorced. And at that point, thankfully, I did not have any kids. And so the divorce was essentially the division of debt. But it was still pretty, it's never an easy task to unravel your life from someone else's. So I changed jobs. At that point, I was working in a title and escrow insurance company. I changed jobs, moved in with roommates because I thought,
you were doing a crazy life, but you gotten functional enough to be able to be independent and sustain yourself and get married.
Yes. Right.
So you were low, but not
19,
maybe rock bottom.
Well, I don't know about that. So from 19 to 25, from 19 to 25, I lived a lot of life.
Right.
Very, very quickly. And it was very chaotic, but I always managed to hold down a good job. From the pet store, I went to working for this title insurance company, and it was a family owned and operated type of operation. And so they were extremely supportive. They understand I was just a naive 20-year-old that was going to make mistakes, but I always showed up for work. I always did a great job. And I think I was promoted through 8 different positions while I worked there in the 5.5 years I was there. Mm. And when I left, I was at the top position that you could have on the title side of the company without going into management of that entire division. And so I just kind of threw my whole life that I had built in this one town away. I quit the job. I moved. I gave up the rental house that I had with my ex-husband. I switched cars. I moved in with roommates because I felt like it would be good to have support structure. So I didn't just sink into depression all by myself in an apartment.
Yeah,
also, it made sense money-wise.
What made you want to do all that? Just inspired you to I got to dump it all.
I felt compromising too much of who I was to try to become this person that fit in with this other person and what their goals and their objectives were, which were essentially not much. And I just felt like I was meant to do bigger things, not like make more money or be more financially successful, but just I was supposed to contribute more to this world than clocking in and slinging cell phones and going home and drinking on the weekends. I just felt like that there was something more to this universe.
I wonder what made you feel that in that moment. That's a tough thing to come across.
It's kind of, I don't know what it was, but I think I'd separated from my ex and I'd been partying really hard. And I woke up in a hotel room and the other person that was with me was like, this is too much, but they were snorting a Vicodin off the counter of the bathroom. And I just went, this is ridiculous. This needs to stop.
There's your aha
it's
right there,
it's time for me to not be this person. I'm better than this. And so I continued to in technology-ish. I went to work at a giant wireless carrier. And so I learned a lot about devices, technology, and how to sell. And a lot of what I learned from that role, I still use when I'm doing anything where it could be even semi-related to selling, whether it's an idea, an opinion, or a tangible item or a service, or, upselling a client to buy more of a certain service from wherever I'm working, that kind of stuff. A lot of those basic selling skills came out of that job, and not necessarily their sales training, but just the experience that I had interacting with, 30, 40 people a day.
What was your biggest takeaway from that you learned about selling?
Not to judge a book by its cover. That was probably the best lesson that I learned. And it was so embarrassing. There was a person who came in, I won't disclose what ethnicity they were, but I assumed that by the way they were conducting themselves, how they were dressed, and the services and things that they were looking at, the phones that they were talking about, that they wanted to buy the cheapest phone with the cheapest plan because they were limited financially. I made that assumption. And so I went to ring this person up for their, basic phone on their $40 a month plan. And I recognized the name, and it was one of the most leading doctors in the area in a specialty. And I was completely mortified because, of course, as a salesperson, you're commission based, but also at the same time, I was like, I severely misjudged this situation and I feel like an idiot. And so it was one of those like aha moments, just not to make any assumptions based on what you can see of a person. And it's happened to me when I've gone to like used car lots where I'll say, I'm interested in that. And they go, well, let's go run your credit and then we'll see what you qualify for. And I'm like, thanks. So it definitely has like gone both ways in my experience, but not judging a book by its cover is probably one of the most important lessons that anyone who's in a sales-centric environment could learn.
To be able to do the things that you're describing requires an immense amount of self-awareness. The most successful people have high levels of it. You obviously do, and even did back then. What do you attribute that to, and how do you maintain that every day? Because and I'll add to it, self-awareness requires a great amount of humility. How do you do that?
It wasn't always this way. I was raised to believe that I would go to college and get a degree and be a doctor, a lawyer, or something like that. And just exploring life in my younger, before high school years, I just did so like blindly and with utter abandon for the consequences and all that stuff. And I was just so extremely lucky that I never ended up in a dangerous situation.
Okay,
but then
I gotta stop you there
high
because
school,
you're already talking about a lot of danger that you were in. It's all very relative. You were being groomed by a dude over.
Okay, so I'm very grateful that I was smart enough to avoid
Right. You were in a lot
very
of
dangerous situations. Yeah, because I mean, we would like myself and a couple of my girlfriends would be walking home from school on the side of the road, and there would be a lowered Honda Civic that would stop next to us and offer us a ride, and we'd just be like, no thanks, we'll just keep walking. And so it's like we were smart enough to avoid the clear and present danger.
Right.
We were also extremely independent, and despite the lack of parental supervision and the lack of helicopter parenting, I think we formed this little team, this little tribe, and we protected each other. And I remember after saying, no, we don't want the ride, thank you, one of my friends was like, I kind of wanted to do that. And I was like, no, that would have been really not smart. And she's like, yeah, that would not have been safe. And we were like 12 at the time. And I just remember, I just remember thinking, if one of us had been here by ourselves, like, how would this have turned out? Right. I think that having that positive peer pressure to comply with what we'd been told made it so that we were stronger against that temptation, or that the kind of pressure that's applied when somebody makes a request like that. Like, well, it would be silly of you to walk. Like, why don't you just get in the car? Right. And if you're by yourself, it's a lot more difficult to say no. And also it's a lot more difficult for them to kidnap you in your bike. But yeah, I mean, I think I flung myself at every situation and into all kinds of different experiences without really thinking about the consequences. But at the same time, because my parents split up when I was so young, and because I kind of became the subordinate parent to my siblings, it forced me to take on this responsibility of being kind of in charge of the family. And so I was the one that made sure my brothers got up and got ready for school. I was the one that made sure that they got home from school. I was the one that made sure that we had what we needed. And it was just one of those things that extra level of forced responsibility kind of made me operate in an adult world more like an adult than a child from a very young age.
So you have these amazing experiences, and I say amazing, not in a positive way or negative way. It's just amazing.
They're just unbelievable is what they are.
Impactful. We'll say impactful.
Yeah,
Good word
there
for
we
it.
go.
And you have now a background of cyber/tech. You have the human side. Fast forward, how do you put all this together to become who you are today?
So it starts back when I was working at the wireless phone carrier, because this is the silliest story. The first iPhone that I ever sold, and I onboarded at this company just around the time that those launched back in 2007. The very first iPhone I ever sold was to my now husband. And it was completely DOA, would not power on. And at the time, my guidelines for selling these things said that I couldn't open it, I couldn't activate it. I had to literally put it in a bag, seal it, and send the customer out the door with it. And they had to activate it at home because Apple was very much wanting to control that process. And so after going home and it wouldn't even power on, he wanted to come back and exchange it. And my store manager put me in a really uncomfortable spot and just said, we can't do that. We're not allowed to. And which was the policy. But then during the discussion, he tapped his Bluetooth and said, "Hi, this is Bill," and walked into the back room and left me with this irate customer on the sales floor. And so I had to diffuse. This wasn't the first time. I had to diffuse a really angry person and kind of beg forgiveness and throw myself on the sword and just say there's nothing I can do, and have them be okay with that and happy about it when they left. So anyway, I did that. And then after that, he would come around and ask if I wanted to go out. And I said nope for quite a while, and then finally conceded. And so I think it was within about 2 weeks of meeting that I moved in, and we've been together ever since. And it was just one of those crazy things where everybody's like, "Are you sure?" And initially I was like, "You don't want any part of this. You seem like a nice guy. I'm a train wreck. It's not going to work out." And he's just like, "Oh, okay, we'll see." And it was just his complete and utter belief in me that I could be more than just the inventory manager at a wireless phone store, on the retail side at that. It just was something that propelled me to want to find more in my career. And so I switched roles. I went back to title insurance and then went into market intelligence and research for a global multi-billion-dollar staffing company. And so I was working in consulting for the staffing company and went from online content creation to doing analysis of different workforce markets, and then creating the content that would be presented to clients, like where do I put my next call center, or how can I find the skills in the United States for this job, and putting together that intelligence essentially for our clients. And my husband, I had encouraged him to start his own IT MSP and quit working for someone else. And so we co-founded this IT MSP, which later morphed into a voice over IP phone service company that he still owns and operates today. And along that journey, we found DEFCON, which is the world's largest hacking conference. And the attendance, I believe, is somewhere around 30,000 people annually in Las Vegas. And at DEFCON, I felt really silly being there. Like the first year that we went, and this was about 6, 7, 8 years ago.
And who typically goes to DEFCON?
Usually the folks that go to DEFCON are people who are either engaged in ethical hacking, meaning that they work for a company, ensuring the security of that company through actively testing it or hacking it, and or folks that work in information security who want to learn more about the current threat landscape and some of the different types of attacks that are being deployed, new research in the areas of hacking. But it is a very hacking focused conference as opposed to like an industry, seminar conference about information security.
And what was your reason for going the first time?
The first time we went, it was because one of our engineers encouraged us to go. If you're hosting a voice over IP phone company, mostly in the cloud, you're very much responsible for keeping your clients' data, your data, and your phone system safe from people that could hack it and either get private information or use the system for malicious things or just scam you and use your system to conduct a bazillion spam calls and run up money on your phone bill. As the owner of the company, it was my husband that was like, it's very important that we start going to this so that we can protect our clients, protect our infrastructure, and protect our systems and all of our stuff. And so he's like, you should come with me. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's Vegas, so that would be fun, but I don't know that it's like the right thing for me to do because I don't, I left computer science like 15 years ago and I feel kind of silly going back that route. I'll be the dumbest person in the room.
Right.
And so I said, fine, I'll go. And I found this village that was very focused on social engineering. And I learned about what social engineering was and how companies would hire these social engineers to essentially manipulate their employees or attempt to, and then use that experience to train the employees on how to avoid these types of attacks in real life, whether it was somebody calling a call center and changing the information on an account and stealing a credit card or an identity or something. It was very important now that companies recognized that their humans, not just their computer systems, were vulnerable to attack. And as the computer systems became more, just strategically defended through tools, software, antivirus, those types of software and technical controls, email filtering, for example, a lot of the attacks were now being leveled against humans because humans were a lot easier to exploit than these really, business class enterprise networks with all these extra layers of security and full teams of security personnel to protect them. And so learning about social engineering at DEFCON, I also found out that they had a competition. And the competition was essentially an opportunity for somebody to attempt to hack a company by pretending to be somebody else and calling the staff of this target company to see if they could get specific pieces of information, like what computers they use, their work schedule, how long they've been at the company, stuff about their janitorial service or food service. These were all specific flags of information in a competition. And I love competitions. And so even though I never competed in sports, I'm extremely competitive. Like, I wouldn't let myself die in a video game where I was playing against a computer because I felt like the computer would judge me for giving up. That's how competitive I am.
Right.
And so I was like, oh man, I would never be able to do something like that. That's insane. Like, they're calling these people live in front of like hundreds of people. Like, oh my God, that's just nerve-wracking. No way I'd be able to do that. The next year I was like, I'm doing that. And so I didn't get to witness the calls the first year, but the next year I made a point of just camping in the back of that village the entire day that they were conducting the calls. And I watched some of these social engineers make their calls. And of course, some of them hit, a bazillion voicemail. And it was painful to watch.
I apologize to interrupt. For those that don't know this, I'll just paint a little bit of pictures. So what it is the people that are in the competition are put in a soundproof booth or try to be soundproof booth with a phone. And they have a list of phone numbers of all the people they plan on calling to get this information from, as a couple thousand people watch them live do these phone calls. So not just the challenge of getting the information, but the challenge of being surrounded by thousands of people judging you
in a fishbowl.
Yes. Keep going.
It's absolutely nerve-wracking. So out of hundreds of potential contestants, they select 14 people. And for this particular contest runner, they would do 14 people, and then you had to compete as an individual. And it was essentially like you got the .com of the company that was your target, and you were told good luck, and we'll see you in Vegas in 6 weeks, kind of a thing. And in the meantime, you had to compile a report, do all of your reconnaissance, investigation, and try to find those flags some other way through publicly available information. And then you get your report back and it would have a grade. And mine was, I believe, 5th in the ranking after that initial report phase. And I went, oh my gosh, I've got a chance. Like, I actually have to try now. Oh gosh, because I figured I'm going to do terribly. And so I went to Vegas in 5th. I completely misunderstood the way that the points worked. I thought I could only get each flag of information one time. So my strategy was not the best for earning the most amount of points in that 20-minute time span that I had the first year. But the next year, I made it my complete and total mission in life to win this competition. And so I spent a ton of time reading. I listened to every single book that Chrissy had ever written. I listened to everything that I could find on social engineering. I struggled to find things around pretext development, which is one of the reasons why I created my talk, Fishy Little Liars, that I've delivered ad nauseum at this point. And then I found this other author named Robin Dreeke. And he had all of these books about building trust and rapport and true and genuine leadership. And it was like this light bulb went off. And it was like, you could apply all this stuff to literally every area of your life and not lean on the manipulative junk that I did as a kid, like tricking one of the visiting professors that my dad had from the United States visiting the college where he was a professor into buying me a CD at a street fair. But like actually leading people to want to do what you wanted them to do and being happy about it and being completely transparent and genuine in your motivation, so that if they found out that it was something that you kind of encourage, they wouldn't be upset or feel like they got tricked or scammed or want to take it back. And it was through that kind of positive framing of everything that I thought I knew about manipulation. I had been working for a startup for a while where I learned pay-per-click marketing, and it was like this like the most base manipulation tactics possible. Like, how do I get somebody to click this 100-character piece of text? Like, how do I manipulate them? And it's all the clickbait principles really around that. And I just felt like this new perspective was something that I could use everywhere, but it would also help me to make pretexts that were not fear-based, not maliciously gross, and wouldn't make people feel yucky, and wouldn't lean so heavily on authority and forcing a situation or forcing compliance, which all these things were completely against the rules of the competition. So you couldn't intimidate someone on the phone without getting disqualified. And so I came up with a bunch of pretexts and I settled on 2. And it was just the most benign conversation about replacing a laptop. And it used everything I learned from Robert Cialdini about influence and compliance, and everything I learned about just leadership and being a genuinely good leader who builds trust and rapport and gains people's buy-in to the relationship from you. And then everything I learned about social engineering from a information security standpoint and how that's used in these types of engagements from Chris Hadnagy. And I took all of these things and kind of put them together and made them my own. And I went into that competition with my 3-month-old baby in the audience with my husband and thought, I'm going to bomb. And I sat down and I was like, if I just get 25 points on the board, I'll be happy. So we're going to try to call IT support first. And I knew that their IT support was offshore. And I ended up being able to convince this individual to visit a URL that I gave them, which was essentially company.us instead of company.com, which I'd registered and then redirected to the place that I needed to send it in order to get the points. And after I got that first flag, I was like, we're going for the jugular. And the competitive side of me kicked in. And I called people who were sales, regional sales people for the organization. It was a ginormous tobacco company, so don't feel too bad for them. And I ended up convincing them that I worked for the company, that I was helping IT with doing a survey or making sure that I had a good list of all the software that was on their computers so that we could send them replacement computers that already had the software set up on it. And I gave them a BS reason that their company computer hadn't connected to the VPN in a while, so we needed to do it over the phone. And did they have a few minutes? And I put legitimately a year of my life into preparing for that 20 minutes worth of phone calls. And so it looked really easy. And unfortunately, they could not record any of these because it's against federal wiretapping, blah, blah, blah. But it was probably the most insane 20 minutes ever, and it went by in a flash. And one of the people that helped run the village compared me to Captain Marvel because I had Captain Marvel on my shirt. And so they tweeted after I was done with the competition, and they were like, basically, to summarize at least 20 minutes, it went, hello, flag, 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 flag. And it was just completely bananas. Like, the person who got second place in the call round was over 100 points behind me. And some of these flags are like 5 and 10 points. So It was incredibly humbling to realize how, like, the transformation from the first year to the second year, and just, maybe I could do this, like, actually for a living. And I ended up trying to segue that win, and the fact that the conference DEFCON awarded me with a black badge, which is like lifetime access to the conference for free, but it's also massive hacking bragging to anyone in that community. It's considered a tremendous honor. And I thought, everybody was saying, as soon as you get your black badge, people are going to be beating down your door, trying to hire you to do this. And, you're going to be one of the most famous hackers in the world. And I was like, no, no, no. And I was right. I was not. Nobody came beating my door down. Nobody, nobody was like falling all over themselves to hire me, because they understood what at the time I didn't really understand. And that is that social engineering is like this itty bitty tiny part of the greater pen testing universe. And, really skilled red team may have somebody who specializes in social engineering, but it's probably not going to be the only thing that they do. And so when I was applying for these roles, they're like, okay, good. Like, you can do reconnaissance and you can do social engineering, but like, we need you to do the technical pen testing stuff too. And so I really couldn't get a job anywhere doing it. And that was like, whoa. It kind of brought me back down from like the clouds that I'd been in.
And that kind of brings me to my question that I'm just thinking of is, what did you learn about yourself during this entire process?
It's kind of embarrassing, but it turns out that I'm extremely competitive and motivated by competition. I also like the recognition that those successes give me, which is something I think a lot of people could probably say and admit. But I think what I learned about myself, the most important thing that I learned about myself, is that all of these traits that I had classified as bad, I could now use in a way that was very good.
How do you
and so I, take all these social engineering skills, and I started a company, and I was doing social engineering, security awareness training, and testing for companies. I was doing a lot of work in this community, this information security community, to give back what I'd learned through this experience, how to develop a pretext, for example, in the way of conference talks. I was doing conference talks about mental health in this space. I was doing conference talks about, raising awareness for some of the other concerns that we have in information security around compliance, around burnout, around the use of compliance in lieu of security, and all those types of things. And just, I felt this need to give back to this community what it had given me. And I felt like it had given me an entirely new lease on life. Like, I'd found my purpose. And so I decided this is what I was going to do for a living. And it took me a while. Like, I ran my small consultancy on the side of my full-time job at the staffing company for a while. And then I was given an incredible opportunity to join a security company and become a consultant for them. And I learned so much about compliance, about the more blue team or defensive side of security, things like managed detection and response, and doing compliance assessments, and hospitals, and doing HIPAA related assessments. All those things help to put this landscape of security really in much more clear focus. And it gave me the ability to see what I really wanted to do with my time here. And it always comes back to this breaking of things is where I find the most joy. And the thing that's great about doing it is that I'm not what most people envision when they think about a social engineer or a red teamer or an ethical hacker. And that is that I don't enjoy pwning people or taking advantage of them or manipulating or scamming them. In fact, whenever I have to do a vishing engagement where I'm calling people and social engineering them, by about the 6th or 7th call, I just feel like I'm shooting puppies in the face. And it's horrible. It's a terrible feeling. But what's rewarding is being able to then take this information back to the client and show them this is a real threat. This was the best case scenario in that these individuals failed with me, where there's no negative repercussions for them or the company. And now we can learn and we can grow from this. And then giving them the tools and the training to help them overcome these types of human-based vulnerabilities in the future.
Alethe, there's so much I want to dive into about how you do all this, but unfortunately, there's never enough time. Someone has a fascinating story, but I do want to see if you have maybe 3 things, because I think forging trust is what you are exemplary at. And you learned it through seeing it, witnessing it, the good, the bad, the ugly. What 3 things would you say people could maybe start doing or thinking about today, no matter where they are in life, what challenges they're facing? Because as you've demonstrated, you got through your most challenging times in life because you had good, healthy, strong relationships, and you couldn't have those without trust. What 3 things would you think people should really focus on maybe to start having those kind of healthy, trusting relationships in their life?
The 3 things that I think are the most important, some of which I know you cover pretty well in depth in your books, by the way. But first of all, humility, not trying to be the smartest person in the room, and definitely not telling everybody how smart you are. Being humble and being open and receptive to new ideas, to learning things, to looking at something that you believe to be fact from a different perspective. Just having that humility at the core of what you do and how you conduct yourself. Secondly, I would say being honest and transparent about your intentions, about your motives, about the circumstances, and just laying your cards on the table. I can't tell you how often that has worked for me in like the best way, like completely embarrassing, awful to admit scenarios where it's just like, yeah, I did this or I said that, and this is why, and just being completely transparent about what happened and not trying to BS people, for lack of a more eloquent term. Just that transparency and setting the right expectations up front and communicating effectively, that transparency is essential. And then finally, accepting responsibility when you mess up.
I love
when
it.
you just totally mess up, just being able to say, yeah, that was me. I did that. I made this mistake. And oftentimes I'll include this is what I learned from that, and this is how I'm going to do it better next time, if I can, or if I feel it's warranted. But just being able to say, yeah, the reason why we missed the deadline was me, and not giving excuses, but showing that you're going to grow from that, as opposed to trying to get out of taking responsibility for the blunder, is probably something that took me the longest to learn. And I still have a tendency to be like, that's not my problem. I didn't do that. Meanwhile, it was absolutely me. But being able to take responsibility, especially in work situations, for, the things that you should have done, could have done better, and just kind of taking one for the team, so to speak, when you're the reason why they missed the deadline, is something that has been incredibly beneficial for me as a person, but also for my relationships, especially at work.
Thank you for all you do and who you are. Those 3 pillars right there are quintessential for anything in life. Humility, transparency, and owning it. It's really pretty simple, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Simple to say.
It
hard to
seems
do.
Simple, but it can be pretty tough, especially when you're like, I don't want to be the person that gets blamed for this.
But the beautiful thing is, and you're displaying it throughout this entire time together, and that is, people are not looking for perfection. They're just looking for effort. And if they know you're making an effort in each of those 3 areas, who doesn't want that person on their team? Who doesn't want to be a resource for you? Who don't you want to be a resource for others? Knowing what questions you want to solve in life and moving forward with that methodology, it's what happiness is. It's perfect. Absolutely. Alethe, what didn't I ask you that you wanted to make sure you shared with the audience before we go? Anything?
I would say the one thing that I would love to include is, and there's a really great like graduation speech from Jim Carrey that kind of covers this, but 20 years ago, I never thought I could have amounted to much of anything, let alone this. And what I've learned is that you will have to work your tail off, but if you put something out there in the universe and make it a goal and work your tail off, you can essentially achieve anything. And so me being where I am today, I attribute a lot of that success to hard work, but also surrounding myself with the right kinds of people who wanted to support me in that adventure and propel me further than I ever could have done myself. And that includes you. That includes a variety of individuals in this industry, outside of this industry, my husband, and the complete and total support that I get from him to learn and explore and do things. And I start a new position soon that I never in my wildest dreams could have imagined would be a job that I would even be close to qualified for. So it's absolutely doable. And yeah, it did take 20 years for me to make that trip full circle, but it's definitely doable and it's never too late.
All because you're humble, transparent, and own it. And you forge.
And it took 20 years to learn those lessons.
It's a great path when we live it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Alethe, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your life's truth bombs with everyone.
Yeah.
Greatly appreciated. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Forged by Trust. If you enjoyed the show, took away a few new tools, I hope you'll click like and leave a great review of the show to show your support. If you're interested in more information about how I can help you forge your own trust-building communication and interpersonal strategies for yourself or your organization, please visit my website at www.peopleformula.com. I'm looking forward to sharing my next Forged by Trust episode with you next week when we chat with the amazing Eric Hunley about exploring human behavior and its consequences.